welcome to my first ever Q&A video. So these questions are from my Patreon, which you can and should join. So here we go. First question says, what do you do when you want to write a poem but you feel like you don't have any good ideas? How do you overcome writer's block? Great question. Love talking about writer's block. So for a poem, I definitely don't wait until I have an idea. Don't wait for inspiration. I don't wait for an idea. If I feel like I really have nothing to say or nothing interesting to write about, I might go to a place and try to gain inspiration from what's going on around me. The best poem I think I ever wrote, I wrote by just going to a pretty spot on a college campus around where I live and writing about the buildings and just the associations I have with college, and I really ended up loving that poem. So that is one suggestion I can give you if you don't have any ideas and you feel like you need something to sort of jolt some inspiration for you. But generally speaking, I do think that discipline is really important as a writer. I don't think that you should sit around waiting for inspiration or for having a good idea before you start writing. Now, it's kind of easy for me to say because I mostly write novels, and when you're writing a novel, it takes months, if not years. You open up the same document, you kind of know where you're headed. Whereas if you're just a poet, I can see how it would be kind of hard to write a lot. I will also say that while I believe in being disciplined about your writing, I don't like when people say that you have to write every day. First of all, that's ableist. Like, it just is. Like, not everyone can write every day. Plenty of people have medical conditions where you don't know how you're going to feel when you wake up tomorrow. It's simply not practical for a lot of people to tell them that they have to write every day. And I think it just makes people feel really bad. It makes people feel like if they don't write every day, they're not a good writer. And that's simply not true. But if you do want to make a habit of writing a lot, which I do recommend trying at least to do, I would say the most important thing is to make a manageable, achievable goal. Like, set a goal that seems too easy. Like, maybe tell yourself, I'm gonna write for literally 3 minutes a day. And maybe don't even let yourself write more than that. Or maybe you take a week and you say, I'm not allowed to write this week, right? I'm trying to borrow some ideas from psychology, because really at the end of the day, if you're trying to write as a habit, it's like any other habit. It's going to take a long time, and you need to set a goal that's not going to leave you discouraged. So if you tell yourself, I need to write for an hour every day, you're going to fail. That failure is going to make you feel bad. Feeling bad is not going to make you not want to write. So I really, really recommend setting a small, manageable goal. So for me, I really, really like to set a timer for 20 minutes. That's just a time that I found works well for me. I set an actual timer and I write for 20 minutes. And when the timer goes off, if I feel like stopping, I stop. If I feel like continuing, I continue. But it just kind of makes it easier for me to get started, because I'm not telling myself, oh, I have to sit down for an hour or two or all day, which I just think it's unrealistic. So besides all of those pieces of advice, I would also say that when it comes to building a writing habit, that you might want to sort of reframe how you think about writing in general. So what I mean by this is, like, let's take music as a comparison. For musicians, there's a lot of different modes that you play in. You practice, so that's by yourself, doing things like scales, really monotonous, disciplined stuff. You rehearse with other people. It's a little bit more social, still disciplined, probably has a schedule, but it's a different mode. You record, you perform, and maybe you compose. That's 5 different sort of modes where you are playing, where you are a musician. And I think the problem for a lot of writers is that we only do the composing part. And I think if you told a musician who writes songs, okay, for the rest of your life you can only write, you can't practice, you can't perform, you can't record, that person would go crazy. You just can't be a composer all the time. And so I think part of trying to have a writing discipline is reframing it as practice, or maybe even as rehearsal. So maybe you take time where you get together with a friend and you socialize a little bit and you write side by side. Or maybe you perform. Maybe you go to events and you read your work aloud or listen to other people reading their work aloud. Reading is also a part of your writing practice. Maybe today you don't feel like writing, but maybe you have the energy to open up a book of poems and read them with a specific purpose in mind, like, I'm going to read this poetry book and I'm going to think about line breaks. That's writing, sort of. There's even a Twitter account called Counts as Writing where they will just say like, today, taking a nap counts as writing. Because I think it is hard to feel like these things count as writing, but they really do. Like revision is another mode that totally, obviously counts as writing. Brainstorming and outlining also count as part of your writing practice. So I think part of the problem is when you think in this very high stakes way, where every single time you sit down to write, you're trying to compose something amazing, whereas I just try to practice. Now you can't always say for sure which mode you're in. Maybe you sit down to practice and it actually ends up being a beautiful kind of composition, a beautiful poem. Or maybe you sit down thinking you're going to write something amazing and at the end of the day it ends up just being practice. But I think if you frame it as useful, then you don't beat yourself up about that time, you feel good about the time spent, and again, it helps you to build the habit. Finally, the last thing I'll say about this question, sorry, this is a really good question with lots to say. The last thing I'll say about this comes from the book The Artist's Way. I'll put a picture up. I don't remember who wrote that. I read the book. I didn't actually do the book. The book has like a whole system of practice that I didn't actually find useful. But in it, the author talks about how you need to build up your reserve of inspiration. Again, you can't always just be pouring out your artistry. You also have to refill your bank of ideas. And she talks about those as artist dates. That's the kind of thing that she calls them. And she said that every week you should set aside some time and go on an artist date, which might mean like going to see a play or going to a museum or maybe even just taking a walk. And again, maybe counting that as part of your practice will make you feel better, make you feel like you're not like a failure because you didn't write 1,000 words today or whatever. Next question is, what is the usual process for writing/preparing a poetry collection? Some of the best collections I have read are very nicely structured and centered around the same theme, and in general, how to plan and manage a poetry project. Well, I definitely don't think that there's one set way that you have to do it. I totally agree that some of the best poetry collections I've read are centered around a theme, like just a few examples. Museum of Accidents by Rachel Zucker is all about parenting. Another collection of hers is called The Pedestrians feels to me like it's basically about dreams. And a poetry collection I can't shut up about on this channel is called Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded by Molly McCully Brown, which was not only themed but heavily researched around a specific historical place. But again, there's no set way to do it. I think a lot of poetry collections end up having a theme just because if you write poems for 6 months or 1 year, even 2 years, you're probably focused on a couple of overarching things in your mind or in your life for that time period, and that's going to come through. I currently have a problem personally where I have a manuscript collection that is built over poems I've written for the last like 10 years, and so it does feel a little disjointed because my style has changed and the themes have changed. So one way to just kind of make sure that there's going to be a more consistent voice and more consistent theme and format is just to kind of limit how long you spend working on those poems. Now that's easier said than done because then you have to get it published within that kind of time frame, but I would say there's no one set way to do it. But the fact that you're saying some of your favorite poetry collections have a theme or, you know, some kind of connective tissue, I would say that that matters. You know, the best way for you to approach a poetry project is whatever's going to get you the most excited to see it through. And so if themes and consistent kind of satisfying collections that feel like they're cohesive is what you like, then that's probably what you should do. But there's definitely not like one way to do it. And you might want to read Poetry is Not a Project by Dorothy Lasky, because that kind of challenges the whole idea of approaching a collection as a project, and so that might just give you an idea of at least one poet's very strong opinion on the matter, although I actually totally disagree with her. Poetry can be a project, poetry can be whatever. Next question is about me. If you were forced to choose from all the activities you like, i.e. poet, writer, comedian, vlogger, musician, etc., and only continue to do one professionally, which one would you choose and what would the reasoning be? That's an interesting question. Thing is, I kind of don't think it matters. I really think that the most important thing for me would be to build an audience. And so if I can do that, like if I could do that over YouTube, then maybe the audience of people would be willing to read a book or watch a comedy special or listen to an album of music. So I don't really care what I do professionally. I just need to build an audience, which is obviously way easier said than done. But like pie in the sky, fantasy world, what would I want to do? Comedy would probably be the most fun, and also the least amount of hours of work. Like you do 1 hour of work in a day, and that's your whole day of work. So that's kind of appealing to me, and honestly, I actually think I feel most confident about my innate talent as a comedian. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm a super, super talented musician or writer. I have worked really, really, really hard as a writer, but I went up on stage for the very first time doing stand-up comedy, and it went pretty well. So I'm drawn to comedy for that reason, because I think that I don't have imposter syndrome about it, really. I think I'm pretty good, but writing is always my number one. Like, if I had to, your question was which one would I choose professionally, and like I said, I don't think it really matters, because I think like a comedy career could sustain me as a writer. If any of these took off, I could do everything else as a hobby and be perfectly happy with that. But writing is my biggest one. In fact, when I was in college, I actually quit band because I wanted to devote more time to writing. So obviously writing is above music, it's above comedy, it's always been my number one. But, very few people get to make money off of writing. Very few people get to live by just writing. So I don't really spend a whole lot of time fantasizing about that. And truly, from like a monetary job standpoint, I would really love to get more people to sign up on my Patreon, and specifically just because I really do enjoy manuscript consulting. I've been having a blast with people who send me a poem a month. Thank you for doing that. It's really, really fun. It helps me to improve as a poet. So in the short term, yeah, I would like to do more consulting. That was a long answer, but yeah. Next question, awesome question. Has there ever been a novel or poem that moved you to tears? I love this question because I would love to hear if a poem has moved anyone. I mean, I'm sure it has, but if you're watching this and a poem has made you cry, please put the poem in the description, because I definitely don't think any poem has ever made me cry. And, I've been deeply moved by poetry, but never cried. And I definitely have been moved to tears by many books. It's hard to remember them, though. Two come to mind because I've read them kind of recently. Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Killed me. Heartbreaking. Tragic. Truly recommend it. It's mythological in nature, but I'm not a myths person. I really, really am not. But that book was assigned for a class, so I read it for class, and I actually ended up really, really liking it. So if you love myth retellings, I would definitely recommend The Song of Achilles. Another book that made me cry was Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro, but I read it twice. I read it once in high school, and it made me cry when I was a teenager, and then I read it again like a year ago, and not only did it not make me cry, but I didn't really like it that much. So it all depends on where you are in life. Final question. I'm curious about your writing habits. I find that during my brief spurts of discipline, I am the most productive as a writer, but that discipline can be hard to cultivate. Do you carve out time each day or week for writing? I'm not much for journaling, but do you do anything like that? Just curious about your process. So I talked a little bit about this with the first question, but I can be more specific. I do journal, but I consider that more of like a therapy thing. I think that journaling for many, many years, starting as a young kid, did help me like cultivate a voice and a style, but at this point I don't think it really does anything for my writing. But sometimes it's a good thing to do when I feel like writing, but I don't have the energy, again, to feel like I'm composing. So it's like another mode that you can feel like you're writing without having to really write. And like I said, I am a big fan of setting a timer for 20 minutes or maybe 30 minutes, or for you, I would recommend just trying that. I first started doing that when I was participating in National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo. I'm very much a writer of the school of NaNoWriMo, and I can't say enough good things about it. And in NaNoWriMo, they do this thing called word sprints, where either in an in-person event or online or over on Twitter or whatever, you set a timer, you say we're all going to write for 10 minutes, and then 10 minutes is up and people compare how many words they've written, but it's not competitive at all. It's a very, 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 very supportive writing environment. And doing that, I just found that works really well for me. So, and I found that I could write a lot more than I expected to in a short period of time. So I don't have to sit down and make myself sit down for like an hour. I could sit down for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and actually get a lot done. I don't write every day. I do probably write on average like 3 to 4 days a week. So like, yeah, half to most of the days. And then on a yearly basis, like I said, I participate in National Novel Writing Month in November, which is an event where people try to write 50,000 words in a month. I've only reached that word count once out of like 6 years participating, but I always kind of kickstart novel writing and long form writing in November. But if I'm not working on a novel, I still try to write like a poem a day or work on short stories in November. So yeah, I try to write most days of the week. I also try to be really forgiving with myself if I just can't do it. And I do a lot of writing in November, and so I end up doing a lot of editing in the winter months. Summer is often a poetry time for me for whatever reason. So yeah, those are kind of my habits. Hope this was interesting. That's all for now. Bye!